Welcome to Clay's Cortex.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to episode number 11. Not to get it confused, so if you've been following, you didn't miss episode number 10. During the last podcast with Xavier, which got great feedback from, you guys liked the intentionality talk with exercise and especially life and goals. I thought Xavier did a great job speaking. Keep checking him out on Instagram, Xavier_the Kiln. But this is episode number 11. All right, so if you follow me on Instagram or follow Clay's Cortex on Instagram, if you don't, check it out. Every week I post Tuesday what's going to be coming out on Thursday, and then an infographic on Saturday. So you can kind of keep the speed, and then your guys' feedback on topics you want to hear would be great. So some of the other guys here, we're going to have them on and topics they want to talk about, and I'm going to try and get some of the guests, like mentors that I've talked to throughout on here also, to cover the topic of exercise or business or life. So this podcast, what we're going to be talking about in episode number 11 is, and I put it on Instagram like I just said, it's give credit where credit is due, right? So we've kind of heard that term and so forth, and I'm going to kind of get into my perspective and take on what I mean from that, from all three perspectives of the topics that we talk about here on this podcast, which is physical training or exercise, business, and life and everything in between, which is the tagline for this podcast. So I put a quote in the Instagram, and if you guys know who it is, let me know. If it's you that did it, I'll tag you. I appreciate it. I thought this was very inspirational, but it says, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. And I've reflected upon that, and my wife has said it to me a few times, and it makes complete sense, right? So here's a hypothetical, right? So say, for example, you're in school, right? And you buy these shoes, or if you're a girl, you buy, maybe it's a pair of shoes or a pair of clothing, and nobody else has it. And then all of a sudden, everybody starts getting that, right? Some people will get really frustrated. They'll be like, oh man, I wanted to be original, and I had this, and now everybody's got it, and so forth. No, dude, switch your perspective, right? Like, that's a form of flattery. People are like, man, that's sick. I got to get some of those, right? Or I've never even seen those before. Maybe they come up to you and ask you, hey, where'd you get those? Or whatever it is. Because they were really impressed with the shoe or the clothing, or maybe it's something else that you do that they're like, I want to get that because it's really cool, right? They're flattering you, right? They like your style. They like your swag, your steez, or whatever you want to call it, right? So this is a very common thing that I've seen within life when it comes to clothing, right? It's a pretty simple example, right? So now we're going to get into life, right? So, and I guess if I'm more specific, it's going to be about like school, okay? So I'm going to try and tie these in. So in life, right, we all go to school at some point, middle school or elementary all the way through up to high school and so forth. And in school, we've at some point within your journey in education have had to write a paper, right? So, and I know it's like, what's your background? What's the narrative? Did you deliver the story? Did you tie in the characters and so forth? Or it might be a research paper where it's like, okay, here's the topic you're going to be talking about, and you're going to pull in references and so forth, okay? And I'm going to focus on that one. But in high school, right, if you don't reference your material, you can get in trouble. You can get a bad grade. I'm not saying you get suspended. I wrote down that you could get suspended. You could, I guess, if you're habitual with the whole aspect of doing it over and over and over again. But in college, you can get expelled, right? Like if you don't reference your materials on your paper, you can get expelled, right? So, and I'll get into later on why that might be. But hopefully you're referencing your materials, because the whole point is to give credit for the people that you're using as a reference, right? And if you're not referencing anything, there's no chance to look at your credibility, if your paper is valid, if you're using it for certain numbers on research in your paper and it's not validated, it's like, that's not a good thing, right? So you might not get suspended, you might not get expelled, but you might get a worse grade and have to rewrite the paper and so forth, which is frustrating and so forth. But I actually had a classmate in college and they got expelled from college for that. And I was like, holy cow, because around here in high school, they've got this program teachers do where they can input the paper, look to see if anything's been just straight up copy and pasted, and if your references are in your, references at the end of your paper. If it's not, there's some repercussions, right? So I wrote this thing, I said, without references, there's repercussions, right? So if you don't reference your material when it comes to papers, there are repercussions, okay? So just keep that in mind. So let's transition into business, okay? So when talking about business, I can talk about so many examples in business when it comes to not giving credit and so forth and going on. And so what I want to talk about is there's this thing called a trademark and there's these things called patents. And you can infringe on either one of those, right? So let me just talk about a story. So recently, Jackie, my wife, showed me a clip from this movie called Coming to America. And it's a great movie, like it's hilarious. If you're old enough, watch it. It's got Eddie Murphy, and he's a Princeton heir in Africa, and he wants to come to the U.S. and so forth, and he starts to work at this restaurant, where if we looked at the restaurant, we might think, oh man, that's McDonald's. It's not. It's called McDowell's, right? And so they're like, well, it looks like McDonald's, and the owner's like, no, the arches are different. They have arches, we don't have arches, and so forth, right? So that was the way that he was trying to get past and through not having to deal with the whole McDonald's thing. And that's not a big part of the movie, but it's kind of like, I thought it was funny. That kind of sparked an interest in me. But you can infringe on somebody's trademark. You can also infringe on somebody's patent. That's why you've got to be original, right? Or contact them. Here's another example of the patent. There's a squat rack company out there, and I believe they were on Shark Tank. I'm pretty darn sure they were on Shark Tank, and it's called PRX. Really cool rack. I personally haven't experienced it. I've seen it, right? I haven't actually squatted on it and so forth, but I've seen it. A buddy of mine has it at his house. He was like, dude, it's awesome. It saves space and so forth. So it's a collapsible rack. So you can, put it into the wall and then you can unbolt something and bring it back out. So it's a pretty stable rack, and they've tested it and so forth. Well, they went to market, okay? And they went to market, and there's a bigger company out there. I'm not even going to say the company, but there's a bigger company out there that saw this idea and started creating their version of that. And it was pretty much the same rack, just with their logo and stuff on it. And so when they were on Shark Tank, they were like, well, is anybody infringing, or is anybody challenging? Are there competitors? And they're like, yeah, there's a company that's infringing on our patent. We have to go after them. And so I remember looking after that episode that company, who's a pretty big, well-known company, they had that rack on their site. Well, if you look today, that rack's not there because they were infringing on a patent, right? So they probably sent lawyers and so forth to protect their investment, right? So they weren't giving credit where credit was due, and then there was repercussions, right? They didn't reference it, and they were infringing on a patent, so those repercussions came in, right? So with that being said, when it comes to business, if you're not giving credit where credit is due, or you're stepping on somebody's toes in what they do, you could be up for legal action, right? Another not good thing, right? Now, along with that too, from my perspective, what that showed me of the bigger company, because I've gotten some of their products, a couple of little things, nothing really major. And to me, as a consumer of their business and their products, it lost some credibility with me because of integrity. I know, cash is king and all so forth and so forth, but if you don't have integrity in business, then who are you, right? And that's just how I function here at Curtis Clay Training, how the guys here function. Integrity is crucial, and that builds credibility also. So if that company, I probably won't buy anything from them ever again because of that. And again, I'm just one person, right? It's probably not going to affect their conglomerate, their business, and what they're doing. Actually, I don't know if it's a conglomerate, sorry, but their business, and they're obviously really good at what they do. They make good products. There's another company I like better, which is Sornex. Sornex is an awesome company. Customer service is unbelievable. There's a plug for them. But, they're above reproach. They are full of integrity, giving back, making quality products, making stuff in America, giving people jobs, and they're doing a great job. So with that being said, with business, you can not be credible without giving credit, right? So if you're not giving credit where credit is due, or where the origination of this idea came from, whether it's from, hey, we got this from this patent and so forth, that makes a big difference and so forth, right? So if I look at another company, this is off the top of my head for another company with exercise. There's a piece of equipment I have here. You can't see it in the video if you're watching, but it's called Strive. It's a Strive bicep curl. Phenomenal, really cool exercise piece of equipment, just a bicep curl, but you can add plates to 3 different positions to match how your muscles work and match your, I'm gonna get nerdy here, your strength curve. So you can have the resistance profile match your strength curve. Maybe if you know what that is, go into the other podcast about exercise versus machines. That's a 2-part series that covers that, so forth. There's a plug. But this company came in and and bought the patents or went to that company Strive and took over that. They rebranded it. It's called Prime. And Prime is making some unbelievable equipment. And I guess what's really cool about that is they went about it the right way. They went about it the right way instead of just saying, well, that company's, they were ahead of I believe that Strive was ahead of their time. They're ahead of their time. They're done. Nobody knows what that is now. Now we're going to create our company, but do the exact same thing. They didn't go about that way. So in the future, when it comes to buying equipment or getting products, because I have their handles and so forth, I will back Prime because that's a quality company, full of integrity, and they went about things the right way, right? So they gave credit where credit is due. And something that's really cool that they're doing is that if you've got an old Strive piece of equipment and you're closer to the Pennsylvania area, they will buy that piece of equipment back from you to store that and then give you a discount. I believe it's a discount on the exact same piece of equipment, but made by Prime, right? One, that's smart business to get their product out there, to get their colors seen, to get their machine seen, to be used, which gets the market out there to see what they can do and the benefits of their machines. But along with that too, they're giving credit where credit's due, saying, hey, it came from this company, but now we're just propelling it forward, right? So it builds credibility, right? And that's what's huge. You don't want to lose credibility if you're not giving credit where credit is due. That's a huge one, right? So let's get to the main topic that I kind of wanted to get into, which is exercise, the fitness industry, and so forth, okay? So I'm going to say this, and this is what I was going to title the podcast, but my wife gave me some great insight from her perspective, and I want to give her credit. So she's like, don't title it that, because somebody could, say it differently and be like, well, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I get that. So that's what I did. Give credit where credit is due. But what I was going to call this is there's nothing new under the sun. That's what I was going to call this. And I still think that makes sense. And if you can, conceptualize around what that means, there's nothing new under the sun, right? There's variations and so forth. So let's talk about the fitness industry. And Instagram, for example. When it comes to that, right? We look at Instagram, if you're in the fitness industry, somebody may post about an exercise or an exercise that they created and so forth or thought of, right? And they post it. And then all of a sudden you might see, like on my Instagram feed, I see it all the time happen continuously throughout the year. Somebody will post an exercise and then somebody else, multiple people that I follow or people that it comes up on the popular page, they'll be posting the same thing. Hey, look at this exercise that I created. And in my mind, I'm like, the first place that I saw it was from this guy or this girl. They posted it first. And why wouldn't you give them credit? Like, hey, this post that they did inspired me to either continue with this exercise, to make it better, and so forth, right? We need to do that. We need to start giving people credit for ideas or topics and where things are going, right? Like a couple that I'm seeing recently is that I see somebody post about vertical training and how important vertical training is and how you should do our vertical program. Well, now there's like a bunch of people doing vertical programs. You should buy my program online to do this. It'll increase your vertical, which is cool. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but everybody just copies everybody, right? I think about this quote essentially, or this picture. It's more of a picture where I see all these fish going one direction, and then there's one fish going the opposite direction. And they're saying, like, in some of the posts, it said, be that one fish going the opposite direction. Go against the grain because everybody's doing the same thing, right? So I thought about that. I thought about not that, but essentially, why does everybody keep doing the same thing over and over and over again? Because what happens with, I would say, consumers, clients, people looking for exercise professionals, they'll be like, well, I mean, everybody does the same thing. I see trainers as the same. There's nothing different. So then they start to treat us like a consumer type market. Like they'll compare like the price of, like example, the price of a banana at Whole Foods or PCC versus, PCC is a local kind of Whole Foods-ish place that my family shops at. And then Whole Foods, if I get the price there versus like say a Safeway or a Vons, it's gonna probably be cheaper for a banana at Vons, right? So they're gonna be like, well, if that's the case, I'm just gonna go to Vons to get the banana. That's how they're viewing us in the exercise community, right? They're not viewing us as true professionals because they're like, well, they all do the same thing. They just count reps. They all do the same exercises, so forth, so forth. So how do you deliver value to make you different? But if they're going on Instagram, which a lot of people are, or YouTube, to vet people, and they're all seeing the same thing, how do you make yourself different? You should be that fish going against the grain, not crazy though. Don't go crazy, right? Like deliver things more professionally, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Hold on a second. This just got really loud in my ears. Sorry about that. So if we continue on. But if I want to be real, why is it that everybody doesn't, in Instagram, on the fitness community, why do people not credit where the information's from? I was thinking about this, and the reason why I think that is because everybody within their field wants to be seen as an expert. When it comes to exercise design, when it comes to program design, they want to be seen as an expert. Is that a bad thing? No, you should be seen, hopefully you should be striving towards others around you looking at you as like, wow, that person's very good at what they do. They might be an expert. I don't think anybody's an expert. I think that potentially some people are really good at what they do and they want to continue to get better, but that's semantics and so forth. But if everybody wants to be seen as an expert, it has to do with their ego. They want to be seen as the person to go to for this. They want to be seen as this, and this, versus like, hey, what are all the things that you absorbed when it comes to education and spurred those ideas and give credit where credit is due, right? Like I've been to so many courses in my entire career, which if I think about it so far, it's really not been a super long career, right? Like I got out of college in 2010. It is now 2019. I've been in business since 2012. So that's like 7 years of business. And I've changed and evolved based off of classes I've gone to, courses I've gone to, and I credit those courses, right? So, but what I was thinking about is what makes an expert and what builds credibility in an expert, right? And I thought about it. Experts in their respective fields, they reference their innovations or changes. And what does that do? Why do they do this? They do this because it builds credibility in their field. It builds that credibility of like, hey, I did, like just hypothetically, oh wow, I thought of this heart surgery and I was looking at references from back on this surgery, and now that we have this technology information, we can actually go about it differently to one, cause less stress to the person's heart, and the recovery's through the roof much better, let's do this. But they reference that. So the reason why referencing is so important, and I knew this, but I didn't know this. So there's a guy named Reese Manchester. He is I would say a true exercise scientist, and he's friends with a lot of other really smart people. And Reese is unbelievable with this. He references everything, right? He kind of lays low, but this dude is brilliant. He references everything, and it builds credibility in what he does because of the fact that he's not like, hey, I had this idea and it was sparked from this, or hey, I'm using this exercise and setting it up this way, and I'm doing it because of the course that I went to, which was RTS, and he references Tom Purvis and so forth, and he references other people or other professionals. It builds credibility amongst him, amongst his peers. It also builds his reputation up. So if I look at that, I would say he would never admit this, but he's very smart. He might admit that, but he wouldn't call himself an expert because he's super meek and humble. But because he references things, it builds up credibility amongst his peers, right? Which opens up doors for him to continue to grow. So because he gives credit to somebody, he has allowed himself to grow and get better, and then he gets credit because he's not taking all the, like, oh, I created this and I did this. He's sparked with ideas of reading research, referencing that research to keep innovation going forward when it comes to exercise. And he looks at like isometrics, PAP, all that kind of stuff, right? So I looked at that, and that was a tangible example for me, but he essentially told me this in a course that I went to through the Muscle System Consortia. He was speaking, they were all speaking, but he said, the reason why we need to reference is because of the fact we need to look at the history. Where did this come from? If we don't know where it came from, how can we progress things forward, right? And I was like, oh my goodness. And what he was talking about was manual muscle testing. And I thought that was very fascinating. And I never thought about it from that perspective. Why is it that I needed to reference my papers in class and so forth? Well, that's the reason why. They want to know where you got this from and if you're using that information in its certain context, right? And so I thought that was super interesting. And he made that clear to me, right? And I think all the other instructors there from the Muscle System Consortia helped make that clear. They were kind of conveying that message of why it's important to know the history of where it came from. So like, for example, manual muscle testing. I didn't know this until I went to the course, but I was buying a bunch of manuals to learn. I was buying a bunch of manuals or books to look at, okay, if I'm gonna use manual muscle testing, and I need to know more about it. And I kept buying manuals, but they made it pretty clear in that course. And they were like, well, this is how it started. Manual muscle testing started because of the polio epidemic, right? I was like, whoa. One, I was like a kid in a candy shop, like, whoa, dude, I want that candy. Whoa, that caught my attention. Well, why is that? Well, they didn't have a bunch of these machines to do manual muscle testing. So they were like, well, what do we have? We we got a bunch of hands. So we're gonna use hands and put it on a grading scale. I was like, wow, that's unbelievable. But if you look at manual muscle testing now, that's used in some places, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. It's either a weak or a strong or binary, good or no good, versus it being on a grading scale. But if we go back to the history, because they reference this, they reference why it was created, why manual muscle testing was created, they put it on a grading scale, which I thought was super fascinating, right? But we wouldn't know that if we didn't reference anything and look back at the history, right? So with that, in my perspective, and I believe everybody in that class and other people that follow him on Facebook and so forth, that built credibility within him, right? So I thought it was super, super refreshing to learn that's why we need to give credit where credit is due, or just reference your stuff. Because all it's gonna do is, one, bring a community together and grow from there. Now, I believe, and I've heard this said before, so I'm not the first one to say this. I want to say I've heard this from one of my mentors, Greg Mack, and I think he said it. I also think that Tom Purvis had said it too in a different context. I've just heard it a multitude of times, but I've heard it said this way, that the exercise industry is like the Wild West, right? People are going to create and do what they want to do with no rationale sometimes. And we have to be better than that. We have to move and progress from that. And I thought that was pretty interesting to think about it from that perspective. So if we can bring order to the exercise community, and I'm referencing this to Instagram, you can also say Facebook, or certain modalities that you create, we need to reference our material. Because if we can reference our materials, we can see where it came from, where the innovation or idea was sparked from, and be like, oh, that's how it was used. How can we refine it to make it go better and go forward? Or if you want to change things completely and say, hey, this is what this technique or this tool, this exercise was used for, but now I think it has a better benefit here, let's do that, right? Case in point, man, I'm gonna reference somebody else or give somebody else. There's another person that I really like. I would say he looks into and researches the nervous system a bunch and how exercise influences the nervous system and so forth. This dude is geeked out on it, right? His name is Jacques Taylor. And his Instagram is Myotopia. Check him out. I'll reference it in the show notes and everything. But this guy, he was like, oh, well, a lunge is for, we've been taught, a lunge is for squat, or for quads and all kind of stuff. But he's showing like, well, maybe it does this, sorry. My compressor at the gym is going. But he references saying like, well, what if that exercise doesn't actually work your quads? Or say you're doing a leg press where you go feet closer together, feet wider. What muscles are actually working? He'll hook up wireless EMGs. Hopefully you can hear me. He will hook up wireless EMGs to see, well, if my feet are like this, what muscles are actually being worked, which ones aren't, and so forth. He's looking at the nervous system response to exercise and changing that, right? But he references his materials also. So I guess with that being said, these people that I just talked about, Greg Mack and Charlie and Charlie McMillan, or Reese McMillan, Reese Manchester, Charlie McMillan, and Jacques, like they're referencing material to help solidify or professionalize as best as possible this exercise industry. And we've got to do that. And I guess this is kind of like a call to arms. We need to, as an exercise community, to reference our material so that we can make this a more professional field. We want to be seen as professionals. We've got to change that we've got to be taking the first step to reference our materials, where our ideas came from, and also talking with peers, right? Exercise is a science field, right? It's always adapting, always changing. Exercise is, science is. My degree is in exercise science. And again, back to Charlie or Reese, he said, like my first degree, it's, exercise science degree. Like we're exercise scientists. And so they reference their material. And so that's what we need to do to make this a professional field versus being seen as a commodity, which is like, can I get a cheaper banana here at Safeway or Vons? Or can I get a banana at Whole Foods should I get the more expensive one? Well, we've all heard this. You get what you pay for, right? So when it comes down to that and giving credit where credit is due, that can impact you in life, right? So I use that reference of school. If you don't reference your materials when writing a paper, there are repercussions, right? Without references, there are repercussions. In business, same thing. If you don't give credit where credit is due, you can lose credibility in the community, which means nobody will come work with you or come to your restaurant or whatever it is, or buy your products. And then in exercise, this is more of a call to arms where we need to be better. We have to be above reproach. We have to start referencing our materials. We need to start giving credit to people that are being innovative, right? If you didn't come up with the idea first and foremost, that's okay. right? But reference it because it's going to build credibility and reliance within what you do. And people will see that, hey, this person learned from this person. Maybe I need to go learn from that person. Or, hey, this person, I work with that person and they've helped my body feel better. Well, what courses did they go to? And if I move out of state, can I find somebody that's been to similar courses so that they can implement the same thing so I can keep that ball rolling to take care of my body? Versus it being like the Wild West where everybody makes their own rules. And I believe that in the exercise industry, that's the category we're in right now, right? But there's a shift happening. There's a shift. And that's why I wanted to talk about this because it's near and dear to my heart because this is my career, this is my job, and I want to help people feel better, move better, reach their goals athletically, health-wise, whatever it is. But to be seen as a professional and grow in this field, as all of us want to do if you're in this industry, we need to start referencing people and where we got our ideas and give credit where credit is due. So, with that being said, I hope that this helped you realize or think about, hey, it's okay to tell my bro over there, man, I love those shoes, where'd you get them? Right? You don't need to walk around like, hey, my bro over here told me where to get these shoes, so forth and so forth. But hey, like, hey, man, I really like your style. Where'd you get your shoes? Let me snag some of those, right? They're trying to flatter you without even knowing it and saying, hey, I appreciate that. You getting those shoes, do that, right? Business, man. If somebody has a great business model, dude, give them credit. Say, hey, you did a great job on that. I want to try and kind of mirror that a little bit. Can you teach me, right? And mirror that business model, right? Or I like how you're doing things. Can I learn from you and go from there versus like going rogue, right? And then in the fitness industry, again, another call to arms. We've got to grow this field and we need to become more professional and we need to communicate with medical professionals, listen to them, open up dialogue and so forth and reference, right? Work together and give credit where credit is due by saying, hey, they created this exercise and I didn't even think about that. That was a great idea. Boom, I'm gonna check that out, right? So let's try to grow this field. Hopefully this was an encouraging podcast, kind of open your eyes to some things and what's going on in the fitness industry. And hopefully if you're in the fitness industry, like this is your job, right, or career, whatever you want to call it, hopefully this will help you be better so we can all grow together and become seen as a professional field. There's a shift happening, so let's everybody jump on board. But thanks for listening to this episode. If you're listening, you can listen to this on Podbean. You can also listen to it on iTunes. Just search for Clay's Cortex. If you have Instagram, follow me on there, Clay's Cortex. You can just type that in the username, it'll pop up. And then if you want to watch this podcast, go to YouTube, type in Clay's Cortex. Again, you'll see that drawing of the brain that I did, and check it out. So those people that I talk about in this podcast, I'll reference in the show notes. But thanks for listening. That's episode number 11 of Clay's Cortex. Give credit where credit is due. Curtis Clay, signing out.